You're sitting close to a fire. It's deep in the Ice Age, the sun died hours ago, and the world past the edge of the light is pure black and full of things with teeth. You're not thinking about any of that right now. You're thinking about the smoke, because the wind just shifted, and now it's pouring straight into your face, stinging your eyes, coating the back of your throat. You cough, you lean away, and without deciding to, without any idea that you're doing it, you pull a lungful of it in. That breath is the beginning of a story that ends in a product which kills more people than every war of the last 100 years put together. Here's the thing, almost everyone gets wrong about the history of smoking. They started in the wrong place. They started with tobacco, or with a carved pipe, or with some clever ancestor who decided to roll up a leaf and set it alight. But the smoke came first, long before anybody decided anything, for hundreds of thousands of years. Before a single choice was made, every human who sat near a fire was already breathing it, every night, whether they wanted to or not. So the question that matters isn't when we started putting smoke into our bodies. We were doing that before we were even fully human. The real question is why our bodies were built to care so much. And the answer runs through 4 things I want you to keep in the back of your mind. There's a doorway in your chest that can get a chemical to your brain faster than a needle in your arm. There's the fact that the exact molecule that would one day hook 1 billion people was never meant for us at all. It was built to kill insects. There's a king who wrote down, almost perfectly, everything that's wrong with smoking, and did it 400 years before any doctor could prove him right. And there's the reason all of this turns the cigarette into arguably the deadliest object our species has ever mass-produced. Every one of those threads leads back to that first accidental breath. So let's follow it. Start with the fire, because you can't have smoke without it. And we've had it for a staggering length of time. In a cave in South Africa called Wonderwork, archaeologists found ash and scorched scraps of bone that weren't left behind by a wildfire tearing through. They were left by a fire that someone kept, on purpose, deep inside the cave, roughly 1 million years ago. And 1 million years ago, the hands feeding that fire weren't ours. They belonged to Homo erectus, an older, heavier-browed relative who was tending flames long before our kind existed at all. Which means the relationship between people and smoke is older than people. Picture what that meant. Night after night, for thousands of generations, there was no chimney, no ventilation, nobody glancing at an air quality number on a screen. You sat in the dark, you huddled toward the only warmth and the only light for miles in any direction, and you breathed whatever came off those burning logs. Smoke wasn't an occasional event. It was the air itself. It was the first shared atmosphere our species ever had, and every ancestor in your line drew it down into their lungs so many times the number stops meaning anything. Now I have to slow down, because this is the part that turns a cozy campfire into the seed of an addiction. Why would any of it matter? Smoke is just plant matter coming apart in heat. Why would breathing it do anything at all to a brain? The answer is one of the most underappreciated, like 3 in no 10. Unfold the inside of them, all the millions of tiny branching sacs where the real work happens, and you would cover something close to the area of a tennis court. That enormous surface exists to snatch things out of the air and hand them to your blood as fast as physically possible, because usually the thing it's grabbing is oxygen and you need it this second. But the lungs don't check anyone's identity at the door. Anything small enough to ride in on that air gets the exact same express treatment. And here's the detail that should stop you cold. When a substance is absorbed through your lungs, the blood carrying it does not take the scenic route. It runs from the lungs to the heart, and the heart fires it up the arteries to the brain, where it arrives in about 10 seconds. That is faster than injecting the same drug straight into a vein, because a vein has to carry the blood back through the heart and lungs first before it can ever reach your head. The lung route jumps the queue. It also skips your liver, which normally sits there like a customs checkpoint, breaking down a large chunk of anything you swallow before it can reach the rest of you. Inhale instead, and there's no checkpoint at all. The molecule arrives whole, quick, and hard, and because the dose comes in one sharp puff, it hits as a concentrated little spike rather than a slow rise, which the brain notices far more than a gentle drip. So think about what our ancestors had blundered into without the faintest idea. Every fire was a machine for turning a plant into a fine chemical mist and delivering it through the fastest doorway in the human body, straight at the brain. They understood none of that. They just learned, over time, that some fires, with some plants on them, made you feel a certain way. Because not all smoke is the same smoke. Burn plain wood and you mostly get soot and fumes that make you cough and water at the eyes. But burn certain plants and the heat freeze compounds that do a great deal more than sting. Across the forests and grasslands where early humans lived, plenty of plants carry chemicals that happen to speak the brain's own language, and when those went onto the fire, the smoke rising off them carried a message the brain already knew how to read. This isn't some fringe claim. Your brain comes pre-wired with locks that certain plant compounds slot into like keys, systems that were installed for your own internal signaling long before any plant showed up to take advantage of them. So the first time a person pulled in a deep breath of the right smoke, their brain didn't sit there baffled. It recognized the visitor. Something clicked open. The leading idea among researchers who study this is that it happened over and over, purely by accident, around fires for a very long stretch before anyone joined the dots. Somebody sat downwind of the wrong bush on the wrong evening and had an unexpectedly wonderful few hours. And because that express lane in the chest made the effect land fast and land clean, it was easy to notice, easy to want again, and eventually easy to reproduce on purpose. That is the true birth of smoking. Not a flash of genius, a pleasant accident delivered by an organ built for speed, repeated until somebody reached for the plant deliberately. It's worth saying that this kind of learning was not gentle. For every plant whose smoke made you feel good, there were others whose smoke made you feel like you were dying, and some that simply finished the job. A few of the plants people would eventually learn to handle carry compounds that tip you into a terrifying delirium, or stop your heart, with a margin for error thin enough to kill you on the night you get it wrong. So the knowledge that survived was paid for. Somebody breathed the wrong thing, and the people watching remembered never to do that again. And they told the next generation, and the next, mouth to ear in the dark, because there were no books and no schools, only lived experience handed down around the same fires that made the smoke. That's how almost everything humans knew got carried for almost all of human history. But getting quietly high around a fire is only one thing the doorway ever got used for. The next one is going to sound backwards, so brace yourself. Before smoke was a pleasure, and before it was sacred, it was medicine. People inhaled it on purpose to get well. One of the oldest medical documents we've ever recovered is an Egyptian scroll from around 1550 BC, and tucked among its remedies are instructions to breathe the smoke of specific heated plants for trouble in the chest and throat. Read that with a modern eye, and it sounds insane. Treat sick lungs by deliberately filling them with smoke? But look harder at what they were actually burning. Some of those plants, henbane among them, carry compounds that genuinely act on the body once they get inside it. The Egyptians had no notion of receptors or airways or bloodstreams. What they had was the express lane, and the observation that if a plant did anything useful at all, sending it down into the lungs made it act quickly. They weren't alone, and they weren't clumsy about it. The Greeks used therapeutic smoke as ordinary practice. Hippocrates, the physician whose name doctors still swear an oath to, wrote about having patients breathe herbal vapors to treat diseases of the chest. Travel east, and it becomes more systematic still. Ancient Indian medicine described a practice whose name translates to something close to smoke drinking, a careful discipline with named plants for named ailments, drawn in through a pipe, refined across centuries into detailed protocols. This was not people getting lucky. It was a genuine medical tradition resting on a genuine insight that the lung is a door you can push a drug through, and a fast one. And the wild thing is that we never actually stopped. The asthmatic reaching for an inhaler is using the express lane. The patient going under with anesthetic gas is using it. Every nebulizer humming beside a hospital bed is built on the same fact those Egyptian physicians stumbled onto more than 3,000 years ago. We kept the doorway. We just, mercifully, stopped setting the medicine on fire to get through it. Then there's a third use for that doorway, and it might be the most human of them all: connection. We are, right down to the bone, a group animal. For nearly the whole of our history, a human alone was a human about to die, and a human inside a tight, trusting, well-coordinated group was a human who lived to see another season. So anything that welded a group more tightly together carried real survival value, and it turns out that shared altered states are one of the strongest social glues there is. When a circle of people slip into an unusual state of mind together, at the same moment, in the same place, something passes between them that ordinary conversation can't reach. Researchers have watched this happen and put numbers on it. Brains sliding into step with one another. Trust deepening. The loose sense of us hardening into something a person will risk their life to protect. So when a group sat together in a closed space, breathing the same sacred smoke and drifting together into somewhere else, that was not a party. That was infrastructure. That was how you built the kind of trust that lets a dozen people walk toward a mammoth, or a rival band, or a killing winter, and come back as a single unit instead of scattering into the dark. The smoke circle was a machine for manufacturing loyalty. And because it was understood as sacred, it was rationed, hedged with rules, wrapped in ceremony. You didn't do it idly. You didn't do it alone on a dull afternoon out of boredom. It meant something, and meaning, it turns out, is a kind of break. Hold on to that idea of the break, because it is about to fail in the most spectacular way. But first, the twist that reframes this whole story. And it's about the plant most people picture the second they hear the word smoking. Tobacco makes a chemical called nicotine, and here is the thing nobody feels in their gut when they light up. The plant did not make it for you. It made it as a weapon. Nicotine is a poison the tobacco plant brews down in its roots and then pumps up into its leaves for one specific purpose: to kill the insects trying to eat it. And it is brutally good at the job. The molecule happens to be shaped almost exactly like one of the key signals an insect's nervous system runs on. So when a bug takes a bite, the nicotine floods its nerves, jams them open, and the insect seizes up and dies. This isn't a side effect. It is the entire reason the chemical exists. Nicotine was one of the very first insecticides people ever sprayed on their crops, and the modern chemicals that eventually replaced it, the ones now coating a huge share of the world's farm seeds, were designed as deliberate copies of its structure. The one insect that beat this weapon, more or less, is the tobacco hornworm, a fat green caterpillar that evolved a tolerance for the poison and eats the leaves anyway. Almost everything else with a nervous system stays well away. Sit with the full shape of that for a second. The substance that would go on to hook more human beings than any drug in history was engineered by a plant over millions of years to paralyze and kill small animals. We were never its target. We're collateral. And the only reason it grips us instead of killing us outright is dose and luck. The amount in a single puff is tiny, and our nervous system is enormous by comparison. So instead of seizing, we get a small, sharp jolt of alertness and calm, delivered by that same insect-killing key, turning a lock inside our reward system. And it arrives by way of all doorways. The express lane in the chest, which means it lands in about 10 seconds. Again and again, 10 puffs to a cigarette, a fast little hit of reward, hammered into the brain over and over until the brain quietly rewires itself to expect it and then to demand it. We did not get addicted because we were weak. We got addicted because a plant's chemical weapon found the fastest road into our heads and, by pure accident, happened to fit the wiring at the end of it. For most of history, that danger stayed half-caged because the cultures that used these plants wrapped them in ritual and restraint. And then tobacco left the Americas, and the cage broke. When it reached Europe after 1492, it spread like a fever. Within a few generations, it went from a curiosity that sailors gawked at to something half a continent could no longer put down. And almost at once, some people saw exactly where it was heading. In 1604, the King of England sat down and wrote a furious little pamphlet against the entire habit. He called smoking a custom, in his own words, harmful to the brain and dangerous to the lungs, and he finished by comparing its fumes to the smoke of a bottomless pit. Read that again and hold on to the year, 1604. A monarch, working with nothing but his own eyes and his own disgust, correctly named the two organs that cigarettes would turn out to wreck, and he did it roughly 3.5 centuries before the medical world finally proved him right and started printing warnings on the box. He was not the only ruler who tried to stamp it out. Others went a great deal further than pamphlets. One sultan, a few decades later, simply outlawed smoking across his empire and had people executed for it. None of it worked. The plant had already found the doorway, and demand walked straight through every wall they tried to build. Then came the part that turned a bad habit into a mass casualty event: machine. Once the cigarette could be churned out by the million, cheap and identical, tobacco stopped being something you carefully prepared and became something you bought without a thought, all day long, on a street corner or a train platform. And the companies selling it did not leave the addiction to chance. They studied that express lane and found ways to widen it, treating the tobacco so that more of the nicotine came through in its fastest absorbing form, so the hit would land even harder and even quicker and pull you back sooner. They ran their own research, discovered inside their own laboratories that the product caused cancer, and buried it. They paid doctors to smile in their advertisements. They aimed their marketing squarely at children, because a habit that starts at 14 tends to last a lifetime, and a lifetime was exactly what they were selling. Every scrap of restraint that ancient cultures had built up around the smoke, the ceremony, the rationing, the sense of something sacred that you did not abuse, was stripped away and swapped for the precise opposite instruction: more, faster, everywhere, forever. Which leaves us staring at one of the widest moral gaps in all of human history. And the strange part is that both sides of it are holding the same plant. On one side, a healer 2,000 years ago, laying that plant on hot stones with a kind of reverence, treating its smoke as a thread to something larger than himself, and using it sparingly because he believed it truly mattered. On the other, an executive in a glass tower signing off on a plan to get more teenagers hooked, faster, on a product his own scientists had told him was killing his customers. Same smoke, same doorway into the body. Almost nothing else in common at all. The difference between those two men is not chemistry, it's what each of them decided the doorway was for. So, when did ancient humans start smoking? The honest answer is that we can't pin it to a date, and we very likely never will. The physical proof only reaches back so far, because leaves and pipes and pouches rot away in the ground within a few centuries, while a stone tool sits there patiently for 3 million years waiting for someone to dig it up. The lack of older evidence, here, is just the earth doing what it always does to soft, perishable things. But the behavior underneath the artifacts, the pull toward inhaling something that changes how the mind feels, is clearly far, far older than any object we've ever unearthed. It's older than farming, older than pottery, quite possibly as old as sitting beside a fire and paying attention to what it did to you. Because that is really what this whole story turns on. Not a plant, not a date, a doorway, and a creature curious enough to notice what came through it. The moment one of your ancestors made the connection, breathed in the smoke of the right plant, felt the change arrive in seconds, and thought, in whatever wordless way they thought back then, that they would very much like to feel that again, the whole long machine was set running. Everything that followed, the healing fumes and the sacred pipes and the vapor tents and the loyal circles in the dark and, at the bitter end of it, the man in the glass tower was just that single realization playing itself out across 100,000 years. So the next time you catch wood smoke drifting off a fire on a cold night, and you feel that small, old pull to breathe a little deeper, notice it. That pull is not new, and it is not really yours. It ran through the Ice Age hunter downwind of the wrong bush, through the Egyptian physician with his healing smoke, through every circle of people who ever traveled somewhere together on a single shared breath. It's one of the oldest unbroken threads our species has, and it runs directly through the middle of your chest. You take hold of the other end of it every time your lungs fill, which is to say, constantly, which is to say, right now.